Are you ready? All right, cool, perfect. How many of you have actually heard of DeSci before today? Raise your hand. Okay, so good. Got a bunch of people here. Perfect. So my name is Dogum. I'm the host of Health Unchained podcast. I've been interviewing entrepreneurs that are trying to leverage blockchain in the healthcare space since 2018, and I'm really honored to be moderating this panel here, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll get into questions about DeSci and how it intersects in the enterprise. Gianluca, would you mind introducing?
Sure, Gianluca, Novi, Italian, CEO and founder of Circular Protocol, which is a layer one blockchain for healthcare and science, and faculty at this beautiful university.
Hey, Andrew Hemingway, I'm the founder of DeSciNYC, and we are an organization, community really, designed to elevate and amplify the entire ecosystem of DeSci.
Hi, my name is Michael Fischer. I did a PhD at Stanford studying computer science. I started a group in New York called DeSciNYC, and it's getting probably the biggest IRL DeSci meetup in the world. And then I also started something called Stadium Science, which is a prediction market for health data and for scientific data, so people can place. Imagine it's like FanDuel, but for people that like science. So right now you can bet on the web, you can bet on sleep data, but we're going to open it up to weather data, so people can bet on the weather, and people will be able to bet on which drugs are going to be approved by the FDA very shortly too.
Hi, my name is Winnie. I'm the investment director for DeSci. I'm also co-founder of Avinasi Labs. Avinasi Labs is an AI native layer 2 for longevity, and what we're trying to do is to solve the bottleneck in accelerating longevity research, which is data accessibility. So eventually our mission is to make everyone live the short-term mission is to make everyone live to 120 years old, but eventually we want to make sure that longevity is accessible to everyone in the world.
Thank you all for that. I'm sure I appreciate that. So let's just jump right into questions. The first one, enterprise healthcare is notoriously slow change, as you guys all know. Big enterprises, institutions, it takes a lot to disrupt them. So what excites you most about DeSci in general and its potential at the enterprise level today?
Well, so I started my project during COVID, and that was when I was expecting that at the end of COVID we were going to have a total disruption of the trust of healthcare institutions and enterprises. And it happened. And now what comes next? That was the question in my head. And in my opinion, you cannot rebuild that trust. In my opinion, you need just better tools. So that the new paradigm shift is not trusting the enterprise, is not trusting the brand, is not trusting the perception, is trusting the fact. And now you can verify with using decentralization, the science, the products, and whatever are the services that mostly in healthcare, but in science in general, are being provided to people. And that's how the story of Circular Protocol started.
I would say something that excites me about it is sort of the anti-enterprise. So I think enterprise means you put like a lot of resources into one specific thing, and then you hope and pray that it works. And oftentimes what happens is people bunch the data so that it looks like it's working, but it actually probably isn't working. So I think what excites me about DeSci is like the ability to distribute it out a little bit and have like many small experiments that go on simultaneously in parallel. And then they begin to gather a little bit of traction, and then you can sort of build momentum from a grassroots perspective, as opposed to sort of the enterprise, which is always so top down and so bureaucratic. And one of the things I think we're seeing in like 2020 plus is the sort of the destruction of, like with Doge, the destruction of like things that don't need to be there. So you get a lot more grassroots, like people providing data sets, the separation of power between the people providing the data, the people coming up with the idea, the people analyzing the data. And so when each of these people are sort of competing with each other, you'll get a much stronger research result.
And I think I would tie parts of what both Mikey and Gianluca said, but I would say it this way, which is that the enterprise is dead. The The enterprise is a rotting carcass that exists only on Wall Street. And so this whole idea of like, you know, how do we preserve the enterprise, or how do we maintain it? How do they continue to build it? They're holding on to their like last vestiges of power. And what I think DeSci represents is really the democratization of power, really, and now it's power over your health, over your science. It's the power essentially to be able to not have to trust a centralized organization and take their recommendation for it. Instead, you can say, I want to operate in a trustless environment. I want to be able to have total transparency with the tracking and knowledge of who's behind this and the funding and all those sort of things. And so when you put those elements of pieces that you want, immutability, right? What it leads you to the blockchain, right? These are all natural characteristics of blockchain technology. When you apply that to the lack of trust, to the destruction of the enterprise, especially in science and especially around healthcare, you have a really powerful formula. And to me, that's what DeSci represents.
Speaking of lack of trust, it's true. In enterprises and big institutions, there is a lack of trust. You can just look at the reproducibility of scientific research papers, and you can see that there's a huge need for improved trust. How can DeSci actually improve data or research reproducibility so that we don't have to trust in these large pharma companies with our health?
So there are 4 pillars for decentralized science. So one is that with funding. How can I fund research, making sure that there is no bias in assigning the funding? Because I can be a pharmaceutical company, I want to push my product, I can fund the research that is going to endorse my project. So I need to avoid the conflict of interest. How you can do through the decentralization. But there is one problem, which is making sure that I fund the real science, not pseudoscience. Then there is another pillar, which is the integrity. I build data, I need to make sure that data is the real data that was built and is certified and is auditable at any stage of the road. Then there is another pillar, which is instead the ownership. So who owns this data, where it comes from, what was at the beginning and what comes next at every stage. And then there is the 4th one, which is instead the censorship. I want to make sure that if I come up with a new invention, with a new thing, there's not a system that is going to seize my invention because my affect the interest of another company. Maybe I get killed, or maybe simply will never reach the market. So this is the D in front of science that I see.
So I can add on to that. Actually, I want to ask the audience, when do you stop trusting science? Think of an idea. Do you stop trusting science these days? Probably. I can give you an example. Actually, the time when I starting to hesitate to believe in some authorities tell me certain things is that these things doesn't work on me. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that at some point where science is going beyond quantifying known things and projecting into the future, I don't think that's part of science, even though it's done a lot to justify what they're coming up with.
Yeah, so I think it's actually really similar to what like the trust is, right? It's like it's either over-promising things that we don't know, and then maybe I think that is actually the key thing, right? But for us, when we talk about something like DeSci, one thing I think that's very important is that what can we do with the information that we have in order to make the best bet on what we know and what we don't know. And I think the trust is actually a lot of things to do with transparency. If you know something, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. We don't try. I mean, prediction market is still a thing. I'll let Marty talk about that, but I actually agree. It's that I think the reasons why we should or should not trust certain things is because of how transparent is this information, and also the knowledge balance that we have. And that is very important in DeSci, actually.
reproducibility this is a real issue in science, right? The fact that you may have 20 teams working on the same same project at the same time around the world, not having any clue what anyone else is doing, trying to file same patents, trying to beat the next person to the next thing, and you have a bunch of wasted resources, you have a lot of wasted time and effort and energy, and so I think that this is definitely an issue where people are running experiments, have clinical trials that could be used in other areas. But look, there's certainly ways to solve that. The problem actually is that science today is dependent upon funding from the NIH. Right? It's funding from central entities, and what that does is, whether or not we want to pretend they're political or not, you end up having to follow whatever the agenda is that is given to you by the entity that's funding you. And so when you have presidential candidates, like the last 4 elections, literally last 4 presidential elections, I went back and looked at it, every single candidate has promised that they would solve cancer during their time in office. Every single one. What that means for a presidential candidate is they're going to give more funding to cancer. So what happens is then institutions feel the pressure of government funding to do more research around cancer. And so you end up having this huge over expenditure of resources against something that is certainly needs to be worked on, but it's a misalignment of economic incentives. And so I think that there's certainly ways where the blockchain, where you have transparency, you have public records, you have the ability to be able to log your research, time stamped, it's immutable, right? You have all these things that you can do. But I actually think it's the economic incentives around research that drive a lot of these pain points. They're symptoms, they're not the root.
Right, it's the publisher pairs sort of mentality as well.
I would say it's like a structural issue that is causing some of the issues in science. So I think there's a lack of, if you look at the government, some people say it works well, some people say it doesn't, but one of the things is they have checks and balances and separations of power. And right now there is none of that. There's not a lot of that in science, because the same people that come up with the idea, that have the funding, that collect the data, that analyze the data, it's oftentimes the same person. And so this leads to an incentive for then the person whose reputation is on the line, what they're trying to show is actually successful. So I think if you actually one of the things that's exciting about decentralization is each of these different steps will be a different person. So the person who comes up with the idea will, for example, we're conducting a sleep study right now. So the person who comes up with the idea is different than the person that collects the data. And when the person collects the data, all the data is put on chain. And then the person who analyzes the data is different from the person who collects the data or comes up with the idea. And the person who's betting on the data is another party who's checking to make sure that it's correct. And they have money on the line, so they're very incentivized to double check that everyone is doing the correct thing. So you create a system where I call it adversarial cooperation, where people are cooperating but sort of against each other. And this tension creates a very strong system, I believe.
Very interesting. And one thing I kind of want to bring up here is, in order to actually scale out DeSci, or to have people understand DeSci and it become ubiquitous, it's going to take a lot of time. Is it realistic to think that we're able to disrupt the whole system through DeSci, or do you think there will be some sort of partnerships that need to be made with enterprises in order to scale and grow and get the user bases that we might need to? Questions, answers?
I think we've already disrupted it. I think DeSci's already disrupted it. Now, define disruption, right? Does that mean the entire thing is turned on its head? No, and that's obviously not the point of DeSci. That's not what DeSci is trying to accomplish. But already, I've in the last week spoken to at least 3, established laboratories doing advanced research work, dependent upon NHI funding, saying, hey, we need to figure out another way to do funding. So do you have any ideas, like what could we do? That's, I mean, I think that's as credible as it comes, that DeSci's already started this disruption of what's going on. Now, there are external forces, right? I mean, there's disruption in the scientific community, there's disruption around the trust of institutions, then you throw in this whole, funding mechanism, and you have a perfect storm, and DeSci comes along as a solution to a lot of those exact things that are being addressed. So I think that I would argue that DeSci is already having a disruption.
I kind of agree on half of that, and then I'm able to use a use case, right? So just as these past months, we are very surprised that we actually got approached by quite a few professors from Stanford, Harvard, to us and asking for collaboration. And this has never happened before. Like, they have so much money from NIH, and then they can just do whatever they want with their money. But nowadays, it's not anymore. And also, one more thing I want to put, I want to emphasize is that right now, thanks to AI and the model that we need to create something new has been, every month you'll see new models come out. And that is the same for science. Actually, there are a lot of new discoveries even every day. And my co-founder from Harvard actually just told me that, I don't even have time to apply for IP anymore. Because enterprise, a lot of times, they built on how many IPs you own, right? But these days, he told me that he doesn't want to apply for an IP. Just because next month, this IP will be useless. So what's the point of applying it? Because I used to work at the MIT technology licensing office. One thing that we realized is it takes 1 year to file provisional patent. Sorry, it protects 1 year, and then you get to another one. Long time for one IP. But now that you talk about the speed of reiterating new things, new IPs will take only 1 month. What's the point of applying? So there must be a new model to be developed. And I think it will be in DeSci. And in fact, I think it's already happening. It's that DeSci will create new models for monetization for these new technologies and new models coming out.
Yeah, so the experience I'm bringing, so I've been a researcher all my life. So I started as an academic. And the first problem is that you get funded and you have to follow the interest of who's funding you. At the beginning, there is a little funding, and you go with your free idea. Then if that idea has any utility for them, then you can grow and get funded further. Otherwise, you die there. And a lot of researchers have pressure of fine-tuning their idea, not on the basis of the impact, but on the basis of how I bring my funding in. And that's terrible. We want to really think about this, because you are not really pursuing the best possible outcome for your research, but how to pay the salary of your postdocs and your PhDs, and it's, in my opinion, it's already a failure as a start, as a starting point. So, okay, funding is a definitely important thing, but there is also the other aspect. There are also a lot of researchers that they make up the numbers, and they have great results, and then someone else take a look at their papers and they find out that it's completely made up. So then you have the problem to verify where that data came from and how did they get to these results, because there is, again, the problem is people. There's, in a place where there's no accountability, it becomes very hard to bring innovation and to hide the agendas. Because if there's no problem in being accountable, you can do a lot of things as long as you bring home a check. Blockchain, because it gives you the possibility to audit the data for research, for funding, for IP, for everything, is introducing in the equation the accountability. So if the enterprise is the right place, good. If it's not, I think the accountability is going to force the enterprises to do things the right way. Otherwise, they will have to pay for it. That's the real disruption. It started with Bitcoin, and it's spreading in all the different verticals, in all the different industries. Because the decentralization is not a technological revolution, it's a social revolution. Because now we start thinking decentralized, how to bring back the power to people to verify.
Very well said. One question I have here, let's talk about real world use cases. We talked about a few of them, but I would like you each to kind of share one real world example that you've seen, a project that's actually collaborating with, the DeSci project collaborating with larger institutions, if you see that.
Larger institutions. Or, I mean, we don't have a direct collaboration with Aura or anything, but we've worked our way around it by syncing with, so we're conducting like a sleep study right now. And so we need to collect a lot of sleep data. And, sometimes we try to go the bigger route, but it's hard to get those sort of partnerships because sometimes it's not aligned with their interests. So we worked out a technical solution where we need to get their sleep data, so we sync with the health kit on the iPhone or the health kit on the Android, and we worked around it. But we didn't work directly with a traditional research. We have a goal at some point to release the sleep study as part of like a competition within like organizations, so that people can like figure out like which team compete on sleep within like an enterprise organization, but we haven't really gone super far with that yet.
Actually, there was a case, but it's like way before DeSci existed and appeared. Because 10 years ago I started my first company. 10 years ago I started my first company, which is on cancer data. At that time, we already collected about 100,000 lung cancer patients and their data. And we are very surprised to find that once you have this data, once you have these people, like there's from every part of the world, right? Once you have this data, pharma will come to you. In fact, at that time, we were working with all the largest pharmaceutical companies, particularly for clinical trials. We help them to recruit patients that have a particular rare mutations. We can actually increase the speed of recruitment for, increase the speed by, I think, 40%. So usually it takes about like 50% of the time is really on trying to get the patients. Now we just cut the time by 40%. So it's actually quite fast, and that's one way that I think that like it has been really helpful to the big enterprise. But that's way beyond, like that's way before DeSci is even a thing.
Margaret? I'll go first.
You be the cleanup hitter here.
Yeah.
So I mean, a couple come to my mind, right? So Dell is supporting a nonprofit Rare Compute, providing compute power. So that's a large enterprise, maybe not in the bio world, but certainly they have a bio division and they're offering up resources. Google is offering compute resources, AI resources, making a huge push into the science space. So those are obviously big enterprises. I think you could call the Zuckerberg Foundation a enterprise at this point. And their main focus is all around science and really in the DeSci space. The Dell project with Rare Compute has already come up with I think 3 or 4 different new discoveries, identifying new molecules and things like that. The stuff that Ethan is doing at Curatopia, they're doing partnerships with a number of the large enterprises right now. It's the speed of research, the ability to be able to look into things that maybe normal traditional trad scientists wouldn't be interested in. I think those are where we're starting to see around the fringes of that. I think there's a lot of interest.
Well, I don't know where to start because we're working on a number of real life use cases. On some of them, they are publicly disclosed, others are not. Let's say that I'm going to mention one that I cannot disclose who's with. It's a government, and it's about when you manufacture a drug, you need to make sure that each batch is produced within nominal values, that there are no contaminants, that the final molecule is the pure molecule. But so far, you have to produce the batch, ship the batch somewhere. There will be someone that will take samples, random samples. We will use a spectrometer, evaluate if the batch is fine. And if everything is fine, get a certification, and finally can be shipped and go to market. Today we're working on a new paradigm. We are connecting a system directly to the to the production line of the truck, where the spectrometer is already connected. We can save the data, certify the data on chain, and from the other end, the regulator can have a real-time validation of that batch. That is one of the cases. I'm gonna mention just another one, and it is about AI. And actually it's a lot to do with longevity, because it's technically for longevity. So one of the problems with AI is that AI is a very disruptive technology, but uses data. And you can hide inside the data any narrative you want. You can take patient records and you can say, you can modify the values to make it look like if you use a specific drug, you have a very positive outcome. Then you train the AI, and the AI is going to recommend that drug because you can get a better outcome. So you can bias the output of an AI based on biased data. So how can you prevent these? Because after you train the AI, you cannot audit the AI anymore. So you certify that data. So you create an auditing trail on that data, and at that point, you can always find out if the data was initially biased. So that becomes as a proof of accountability. So it's another government. So two different areas and that are working on adoption of blockchain. Our company is a one-year-old company. We have already more than 30 healthcare projects built on it. And we found that it's not that hard if you offer the right tools.
Wow, it sounds like we're further along than we thought, huh? So let's talk about, again, collaboration with enterprises. Let's say a middle manager is sort of interested in one of your projects, they want to work with you, collaborate with you. But how does the middle manager actually convince executives to work with this DeSci startup? Do you have to use the same language as enterprise? What's the ROI? What's the return on your investment? Are they compliant and things like that? What are those like conversations like?
I cannot speak for DeSci, but I can speak from my previous experience while working with pharma. You definitely need to speak their language, because I think they're very practical. Whether you can actually help them finish a task. They actually don't care about, back then, they didn't care much about what is your data, how much is it sold. The only thing they care about is how long would you be able to help me finish my clinical trials. That's it. Then they can do their own calculations in terms of whether I want to do anything with you, how much I want to pay up front, and once you finish the task, how much will they willing to pay you. Because particularly in pharma, they have a budget, yearly budget that is set. And you cannot do much more than what they already set for yearly budget. So it has to be very oriented towards what their goal is of this year. At least that's the case when I was working with pharma. There's basically, as long as you help them finish the task more efficiently, you'll get the money. And it's a huge amount of money. So at that time, I think it's about $10,000 per patient recruited.
Wow, thank you. Anyone else on that one?
So there are different things that blockchain can do for enterprises in the DeSci space. So I'm gonna make you a very simple example, a very tiny one, because it's almost obvious that you don't need it, but then you really realize that you need. So I met one time a guy that was the CEO of a company. That this company, all they do is they receive samples of drugs taken from the pharmacy, from the shelves, to verify that they are original drugs, and they are not counterfeit drugs. And they get paid by a pharmaceutical company that asking them for this verification. And I said, oh, so you need a blockchain actually to certify your reports. He said, why do I need the blockchain to certify my reports? I read the report, I know it's correct, it's right. I said, okay, then think about it. The pharmaceutical company is doing this because most likely wants to sue someone. And that someone that will get sued will try to sue back anyone involved in the verification process, including you. Even if you did that job, he's going to try to come up with any sort of possibility to discredit you. Even if saying that the record was done not 1 year ago or 3 months ago, but was done on purpose for this lawsuit. How can you demonstrate that? Because it's your word against their word. And then I realized, okay, if I have a certificate on chain, which is on a decentralized ledger, there's no way for me to fake that report. That report has a history, and that's a real history. And I said, how much does a report cost? $1. It's a no-brainer. So you do. So the story, the moral of this story is what? There is a lot of liability when there is the need of accountability. So you want to demonstrate things. If you're doing not the right things, can be a downside. I cannot do the bad things because now there is a way to track if I do something bad. But if I do something good, I also have a way to account for that. And if I created a vaccine and I did all the right work to do, eventually I can prove that if someone gets hurt, the intent was to do the right thing, not to sell something that would affect negatively people. So it's a double-edged sword. You protect the patient, you protect the user of a product from the company that wants to cheat, that wants to do something harmful, saving money for many different reasons. From the other end, you protect the company from any lawsuit, any problem of someone accusing them to do things in the wrong way. Again, it becomes very important to have decentralized, and that's the key word, decentralized proof that nobody can create artificially that something was done the right way. That saves a lot of money to companies that get lawsuits on a daily basis. Pharmaceutical companies always do, because always there is someone with adverse effects.
So this is an interesting question because, what it does is it highlights, I think, a very important distinction, which is that there is this concept or ideal of that we call DeSci. We've all thrown that term around. And then we sort of interchangeably also use the word blockchain. And the two are related but not the same. And I think that when we think about enterprise, what you're really going to see is, enterprise adopting the best parts of blockchain technology and leaving behind any part that doesn't add to their bottom line, right? Because that's what drives enterprise. How does DeSci play into that? I don't know that there is a future where DeSci plays into that. What I think DeSci represents is sort of antithetical to the enterprise, to pharma, to what we know today. And from that perspective, it's not necessarily a technological discussion. It's more of a discussion of principle, of purpose. Yeah.
Culture too.
Culture, right. And so what I think is happening around especially around DeSci today, and how it's going to impact enterprise, and how DeSci is going to disrupt and drive enterprise to adoption, is through taking away, driving profits away from the bottom line. And that's going to happen by the research projects, by the DAOs that are being created, by the funding that is being initiated around new and innovative discoveries. The rate of innovation, as Winnie mentioned, is something that is accelerating at such a rate that no enterprise can compete. No enterprise can maintain. You can't possibly expect an enterprise to adopt at the rate of innovation unless they have a monopoly on a category in which they can stifle, through regulatory and technological advantages, right, stifle innovation to the rate that they wanted to advance at. This is made most obvious to all of us in the sense that a year ago, none of us were talking about OpenAI, right? I mean, sure, a few people knew about it, but we weren't talking about it. No one knew about Claude, like that. How fast did that happen, right? It was because it was a category that wasn't regulatory. You weren't able to use regulation to manage. There wasn't somebody sitting in the AI monopoly category. The problem with science is that we do have a lot of monopolies. They may wear different hats, and they may sit in different boardrooms, but they're all drawing from the same profit stream, right? And so they're all connected, they're all tied. What DeSci does is disrupt that entire model by putting funding into research around categories that TradSci and pharma would never fund because it doesn't fund their profit stream. And what I think is going to happen what I believe is going to happen is that there's going to be a new innovation, and profit will be realized to such a degree that enterprise is going to have to try to adopt. Right? They're going to be forced into it. So I think that it's a hard question to answer. Enterprise and DeSci I see as antithetical. Enterprise and blockchain I see as totally cohesive, and it makes a ton of sense from a technological perspective.
Thank you, very well said. It's obvious that there's a lot of resistance from enterprise around DeSci. They're trying to resist that because it doesn't fit their incentives or interests. But when do you think the disruption will be so great that actually DeSci will just become science? That's the expectation. Decentralized science will become the norm. Do you think that'll happen in 3 years, 10 years, 30 years? Ever?
Sounds like a prediction market.
Yeah, the prediction market is what we're thinking.
Prediction markets need a fixed outcome to work. I would say that DeSci will take over just because it's like more nimble. It's like open source software, sort of like people just you would never have Microsoft write a package that does like checking that the email address is formatted correctly or something like that. And I don't think you're gonna get a lot of the types of things that DeSci projects are gonna come up with. Like a lot of this stuff right now is kind of like long tail that DeSci is exploring. So it's like, does mouth tape work? Do these peptides work? How do I increase does cerebral lysine work? And so it's a lot of the things that maybe like traditional drug companies aren't really thinking about, because they're thinking about maybe Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, and there's no clear demand right now for like longevity drugs or performance enhancing drugs. And so that's the type of thing that DeSci is doing, and it's sort of acting a lot more nimbly than the like bureaucratic way of doing things. What the question was is like, when will DeSci become the de facto way? I think and also maybe it doesn't have to be either or. Like maybe there's a place for pickup trucks and a place for like sedan cars, right? So sort of the more experimental stuff can be done in these like smaller distributed labs, but then when you actually need like a lot of like great coordination and top tier talent and a lot of money, then it sort of goes into a more traditional pipeline. Like maybe the existing pipeline system is fairly good at handling like really complicated drugs or recruiting a really specific type of patient. But then the DeSci thing is for a whole other type of area that isn't even for a demand that isn't really being met by like a traditional pharma company.
I agree on that part, and I also want to add on several things, because I completely agree, like for areas that there's no companies are paying attention to, that's one area, but there's one thing that I recently just wrote an article about in what field in the longevity space that we can enter, right? There are a lot to do with what kind of infrastructures are currently being deglobalized. Internet. It's obvious, right? Like everyone in the world can have access to internet nowadays. So therefore, anything that's relevant to software can be built by anyone. Like anyone can write codes. But for anything that is hard, like hardware, for example, now that the manufacturer mostly is still in China. But one good news I think a lot of people didn't pay attention to is that there are a lot of these like countries are strategizing in terms of how they should have their own hardware manufacturing lines so that like it will not be monopoly. And once that has been reached, I think there are a lot of other technologies that can become decentralized, and which in that sense you can add on top of science, or science add on top of that in order to build things that is truly decentralized. And one idea, actually it's not even an idea anymore, is that one thing that one of our partner projects have done, you mentioned about cancer, in fact already personalized vaccine that my friend and I are working on for our family, because both of us have family member that has lung cancer. And because now that I have a mom's gene sequence, and we also have the manufacturer in China and Hong Kong, we're making our own personalized vaccine already, based on all the codes and all the resources that we already collected so far in the cancer field. And also because of genetic companies are already so widespread in all parts of the world that it's now capable of doing that. It's just that we're not at a scale yet. And the point where we are truly allowing like every country, everyone have their own, even 3D printing for your own drugs. I think this is really possible to make it like truly decentralized. And I think this is about, if we're lucky, I think 3 to 5 years that the whole, like every country is trying to de-globalize, and then it's actually gonna benefit the DeSci world.
Alright, I'm gonna make 3 little points. First one, I'm in love with decentralization, but I'm also of the idea that decentralization is good where it's good, which is not everywhere necessary. The second thing is that I don't believe that enterprises are dead. I think that enterprises will have to evolve, because eventually all these projects will grow as enterprises. And that's okay. The third thing is about when this is gonna happen. I think it might happen much faster than we think. And the reason, so personally I'm exposed in conversation with governments, and they're actually asking for help in adopting or building a regulatory framework that is using decentralization. I never expected this to happen today. When I started my project, I thought it was gonna happen like 3 years down the road. Instead, as for today, at least 3 huge jurisdictions are collaborating with us, are talking with us because they want support and advice in creating regulation based on decentralization. So we're going in the right direction. And when that becomes regulation, it spreads everywhere, all at the same time. Companies will have 1 year, at the very least, to anyway.
So there's this, the thing that keeps coming back to me is like, when the internet started to become prolific and everyone had access to it, one of the things that we saw was, of course, the building of big companies, but also what we saw was the rise of the startup. Because what they had in their hands was the ability to be able to innovate at a rate that enterprise can't. When you add AI to that mixture, you now put PhD grade intelligence in the hand of literally everyone. The rate of innovation is, especially around science, is going to skyrocket. It's going to be at such a rate that there is no institution, no academic laboratories. They're not going to be able to compete at the rate of what's going to happen. And the idea of like finding top tier talent, finding the smartest, brightest people. Look, AI is going to level the playing field. Like AI is going to ultimately end up just bringing knowledge to a commodity. It's going to bring expertise to a commodity, and it's going to be the person who's sort of sitting behind that screen who's able to manipulate and write these prompts in the best way. They're going to be able to run through an entire system that would take something here in this building 2 years to walk through the labyrinth of red tape, of asking permission, of getting funding. They're going to be able to do that from their laptop in the cafeteria. And that's what I think, we're on this precipice of like rapid innovation where you're going to have this rise of like citizen science. And to me, that's with the tools that are coming, with the databases, the data sets that are being unlocked, like there's no stopping that wave. I personally think we're like 6 to 12 months away from an absolute collapse of like traditional institutional science.
Wow, you guys are pumping me up. I love that. This is actually my final question, and then we'll get to questions from the audience. If you have any, I'm gonna start thinking about them now. In one sentence, why should a Harvard student care about DeSci?
That's deep.
Take it down.
Because it's what comes next.
Because it's what comes now.
Because they can still make the same amount of money anywhere they go, and anywhere they want to still make an impactful life. That's one sentence.
That was long, that's good.
Yeah, a couple
Yeah.
sentences.
Because you can do your own, you can start up within science as opposed to working in like a traditional lab, so you have more autonomy.
It's more fun. Well, any questions from the audience about DeSci? Please.
So you mentioned earlier that a lot of the funding was coming from NIH or pharmaceutical companies, and they had either a bias or an interest, and that this way you can have alternative funding routes doing DeSci. Who are the alternative funders? Is it crowdsourced? Is it nonprofits that traditionally you haven't been able to tap into, or is it other TradFi institutions that have not been of interest?
One thing that we're exploring, so like one of the obvious ones is like crowdfunding, so people basically giving someone money in exchange for like future equity in the IP. So say a project starts and like they'll allocate a certain percentage of the tokens for IP. I think one of the more interesting things that we're exploring with is we're a prediction market, right? So we generate trading fees based on how many people bet on either side, and we can use some of those trading fees to go to fund the science research. It's not a lot right now, but I think you can create mechanisms, the point I'm trying to make here is you can create mechanisms that are a bit more regenerative and allow you to create like a fund. That's one of the things I want to mention. This is like, I think we're underscoring. If I had to say what's more exciting about, in one sentence, I would actually update it to say like DeSci is fun, whereas traditional science might be like hard. And so you got like a fun layer to it, and then you use that fun layer to like fund the science.
So there's millions, literally millions of people who are already invested, trying to invest, allocating time and resources against these very topics, but they consistently meet roadblocks in TradSci. Just as an example and proof of that, look at all of the subreddits that exist. And there are million-member subreddits around these topics: longevity, cancer research, sleep. Like there are already communities with real people who spend hours a week dedicating time, effort, energy, resources. I mean, peptides, right? Like there's the amount of conversation around peptides. All that's being driven really by grassroots, by people who are interested, or people who are doing research. When you can unlock that with economic incentives and align economic incentives with individuals who can see how it's going to have a direct impact on their health and on their life, and by the way, they also get to use it as an investment vehicle, right? That's how this whole thing gets flipped on its head. Is by giving the people who are most going to benefit from it also the opportunity to profit from it. So to answer your question, I think that there's an enormous amount of grassroots or crowdsourced funding that's available for these types of things. Just think about families who want to do research on a rare disease that no laboratory in this building will take up, but one DeSci lab will. They're going to get a lot of funding, right? There's funding that's available for that. And then I think there's also going to be a lot of nonprofits who are going to explore this, who are going to be able to allocate resources against things that they're interested in that no TradSci organization, laboratory would take up. So I think you're going to see a very strong shift in that direction, and that's where the funding is going to come from.
I'm going to give you a slightly different answer. So I think that there are a lot of scientists that will take any check to do research, even if there is the money. Because being a researcher doesn't mean you make a lot of money. Unless you invent something and you decide to bring it outside of the university and start a company. So now there is a differentiation between whatever is crowdfunding and whatever is funding research. Because that's a very big difference. I can say, fund me, I can give you a very incredible marketing campaign, and you're gonna fund me not because of what I wanna do, but for how I'm presenting that to you. So right now, the story is that there's not a real answer. Right now, there are not clean, established workflow to find real science through decentralization, but there are a lot of teams working on it. And it's okay that we don't have all the answers right away, because it's an iterative process. We will refine, adjust, and grow.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi. So I have a question more directed towards kind of the future of DeSci in terms of clinical research. So a lot of the research that's being done now is a lot of translational research in the early stages. And realistically, a lot of this research, going on to, let's say, phase 3 trials, can cost anywhere between $20 million and over $100 million. So where do you think the future of DeSci lies when we start moving into this clinical research? Do you think it's going to have to be passed over to other enterprises, for example, to conduct this research, or do you think that DeSci has the scalability to be able to achieve this?
So one of the major issues is that you are running trials mostly because you want to get to certification. But that process is a very expensive process because there are a lot of hands that have to validate that study that you're doing. And one of the major issues, and I have some of my co-founders that they run CROs, so companies that do these studies, is that they receive the data. First of all, there is a very expensive way to go collect the data. Believe it or not, there are hospitals where you really have to send someone there to collect the data from the hospital. Then they receive the data, they do run the study, and then they find out that doesn't support the thesis of the PI, and then they call PI saying, look, we ran the study, it doesn't say the story you are saying. And then the PI says, wait a second, a couple of hours later, they have a phone call, go make sure the data is the right one, go back to the hospital, get the data, all of a sudden now the data is saying the right thing. So there are all these passes, and there are a lot of other, let's say, not very clean steps. All of them have a cost. So what decentralization can do is certify the data, create auditable data, and that data can be transferred from the hospital to whoever is running the study seamlessly without a validation process because it's intrinsic to the data, and that reduces cost dramatically. Because now you have all the validation of that data, not done by a person, one record at a time, but by an AI, a scripting system. But the data, you know, that is the valid data since day one. That's what is changing. So that is supposed to reduce costs. And that's why the government are looking for supporting regulation, because they want to streamline the certification processes to make them shorter. You know that nowadays try to fast track vaccines, right? So now they are looking for ways to fast track drugs without compromising the security of that process.
Sorry, I want to ask a question for you. It's like you're asking translational or you're asking phase 3 in particular?
The beta trial, so like phase 3.
Okay, so that's different. So there actually in FDA, US, and also in anywhere in the world, there are actually conditional approval. You don't need to do phase 3. That is particularly for diseases like rare diseases, because there are just not enough people to run phase 3 clinical trials. So, but I think that is actually very interesting indication because nobody sitting here has the same genes. So imagine in the future, if we're talking about, like, let's say we have a longevity drug, for who? Based on what? It's not going to be phase 3. It will be completely different protocols that have to be implemented. We can learn from how rare mutations drugs have been improved, because like for example, there's some diseases that only have 1 out of 10,000 people that have that particular mutation. There's no way you can run 100 clinical trials, like 100, because they're run out of people, right? So there must be a new way, which I think that FDA just recently have new, I think just in April, that have a new rule saying that we should use more humanoid data to predict what the drug outcome would be. I think that could potentially be, but still it's not going to be phase 3. I honestly, from someone who have actually done clinical trials before, I do not think that we should risk on a drug that haven't been done any kind of human trial. And that could potentially mean that, yeah, we can shorten the time for phase 3, but still, I think phase 1, safety study, you still need it. Potentially efficacy study is still needed, unless we really have enough data to do twin like have a digital twin, which I don't know when it's gonna come, honestly, because we still have this question ourselves. Like, for example, if everyone is trying to run different experiments and try to understand how single individuals personalize like their treatment, we've run out of human beings to actually done all the study. So the question going back is that there will be times that where we can do reduce the time to run into certain clinical trials, but I think that from a safety perspective, we still should have these human trials that are still running, maybe with the help of some of the vertical models that we're currently building.
So I think this is a regulatory problem. It costs $20 million today because it can cost $20 million, not because it should cost $20 million. Right. And it's because pharmaceutical companies spend billions lobbying and have created a monopoly on regulation. It's not that they're good at medicine, it's that they're good at lobbying. That's actually what the pharma industry has become today. And so where I think the opportunity around DeSci is, they're probably, I don't think anyone's going to sit up here and say, oh, DeSci is going to come up with a way to fix, stage 3 clinical trials or something like that. But what I think is happening, and already there's actually legislation working its way through the House that would create a broader scope to allow drugs to come to market. And I think there's going to be this rapid rate of innovation is going to upset even the current process. I don't know that DeSci is necessarily going to be the instrument that does it. It really is a structural problem. It's not necessarily a challenge of how to actually do it. If that makes sense.
I think another possible solution is working outside the FDA and just getting like other types of certification. So obviously, like the end user isn't always going to want to do all the research. They just want to take a drug at the end of the day. But maybe there's like 10 or 100 different sort of certifications that exist out there. Maybe those certifications are done by a prediction market, like that's a hypothetical, and that's one way to. Also, we think of the FDA as being perfect as the gold standard. But I've heard stories where it's not that case. It's just people there at the end of the day. They make a lot of mistakes. They're sort of civil servants, so maybe they don't have the 100% correct incentives or different types of risk profiles. Like some people are just more risk prone or risk averse when they want to take a drug, right? Depending on their level of desperation or just risk tolerance. So I would say that in the future there's probably like 100 different certifications that could exist done by all sorts of different mechanisms. And then you would also be able to reduce the cost with each of those.
Thank you so much for those answers. Any other questions? One more over here. Sure.
Can you speak up?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance. I've been thinking about blockchain has so many good advantages, especially for protecting the privacy of the patients. But when I doing research in hospital in Boston, I found the real adoption, in the hospital, in patients and doctors, is not that high. Yeah, so I've been thinking this kind of situation can be overcome or be improved on us, or what kind of strategy or what kind of challenge are we facing? Thank you.
Can I take that really quick? I just want to give an example. Before COVID, most hospitals or many hospitals struggled to actually use telehealth. But the doctors, the providers resisted using telehealth. So telehealth was a technology that was around 15 years before COVID, but it took that catalyst of COVID for everyone to adopt it. And I think there will be something similar that might happen in patient privacy data-wise, where people are like, now we need a decentralized system, and then regulations will force it upon different jurisdictions.
I want to add on to that. Sorry, it's really interesting to mention because I come from a different perspective. I'm actually from China. Many of you don't know, but I think it's really interesting. Like, there's a competition between China and US, and they're trying to compete who is adopt blockchain first. I think the US is probably going to do it because right now China is already working on blockchain. In fact, a lot of government is already working on blockchain projects. Now, sometimes it's not only Web3, but in blockchain. So if they're trying to compete, just kind of like AI, right? Kind of like chips. I think they will do that. So I think that I'm looking forward to seeing that actually happen.
So we have like in Italy, for example, 8,000 pharmacies. They are testing pharmacies. They test, they do blood work and other kind of tests on patients, and they are connected on blockchain to certify the records. So it's coming, but one more thing, the ICH has issued what are called the Good Clinical Practice Guidelines for 2025. They were published on January 7th that require by the end of 2025 to have a regulation in place to adopt certification on data, which is usually and typically done through blockchain. So I'm expecting blockchains to be in the healthcare systems of the most developed countries at least within 1-2 years at the very least.
So private data is an interesting thing when you come to a technology that is by nature public, right? So we kind of throw around like we're going to put human biomarkers on chain. The problem is the chain is public and it's transparent, and so that's why I think there's been a natural sort of delay in this regard. There are new primitives that are new privacy primitives that are being developed even now. MPC, multi-party computation, FHE. They're developing different DEEs in which they are creating privacy. Yeah, zero knowledge proofs for sure. And so there's a I think the private data piece is something that has still got to be solved in order for you to start to see this sort of mass adoption. It's the same reason why no one here has their bank account on chain. Right? Everybody here would say, yeah, we believe in the blockchain. Yeah, it's great. No one uses it for their personal bank account because it's public. So you don't want that. So it's the same thing with your health and personal data. But the way that adoption occurs is when the greatest force known to man, which is the market, demands it. And so when I go to my doctor and I can say, hey, look, on this on my app here, I have all of my genomic data, I have all of my DNA data, I have all of my health records, I have my last chiropractic visit, my dentist visit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have all my health data, and for the first time ever, my doctor gets a complete look at who I am, right? I'm gonna say to him, I want all your records on here too. And he's gonna say, oh, our healthcare system doesn't support that. And I'm gonna say, okay, that's fine, I'm gonna find another doctor. Right? As soon as you say that, as soon as that starts happening, suddenly, like the slowest organizations known to man to adopt are going to say, "Oh, we need to start figuring out how to adopt." It's going to be market demand. It's the way that's going to drive it.
So I need to add something on this because I have to now. So it's a two-step evolution. Now, if you go, everybody is coming out with a decentralized healthcare record. No one wants that. I mean, people want it. Institutions don't. And as long as I'm concerned, you have to go to an hospital. And that is an institution that holds the data. And it's like to take the bone out of a dog. They're never going to give up that data. So the first step is going to be zero knowledge proof. You keep the data, the ledger is going to give you the certification of the data. So a public proof for private data. The second step is that eventually there will start the regulation demanding that all the silos, different hospitals, will need to become interoperable. When they will become interoperable, at that point, there will be decentralization of the full record. The small pieces will still be in the silos, but you will be entitled of the aggregate of your data. That's the way it's going to play out in the near future, let's say like this.
All right, I think that wraps it. Let's thank our panelists for being here, and thank you guys for all engaging so much. Keep talking. Just a question.
I have a technical question on how do you verify data in blockchain? There is a bunch of ways, like zero knowledge, multi-party computation, like decentralized Oracle, and I'm curious, each of your projects.
Sorry, go ahead.
I can answer short. We use ZK and TE.
Oh, okay.
Short answers?
No, it's
We will discuss that.
We use Million to store our data, so we don't use ZK, but we use MPC.
Awesome. Yeah, and happy to continue conversations.
Oh, did you wanna go?
with Adrian.
Go. I don't have a project. I don't have a project, so I'm not.
It's all about mine. We appreciate it though.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. If we could have a huge round of applause for our speakers. So grateful for having them. And then just a quick hub. We're going to be transitioning to the Tron Happy Hour. It's starting at 6:30. That's why it's slight rush. But yeah. The sign up for that is at tron.hbc25.com. I do recommend that you have registered by the time you get to the door because I think there's going to be a lot of demand for it. But you all get a free ticket accompanied by your conference ticket, so I really hope to see you there. And open mark. So thank you. Thank you guys so much.
It's good.
Did a great job. I literally did not see a single
So I'm not too. Thank you.
Thanks all the panelists.
They were all just here for another
Hey.
so
Nice to see you. That's for the day. You did it.
Nice job.
Thank you. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Great discussion. Great. Thank you for the question. Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for your question. So actually, I have a podcast. I don't even have a project. So I'm trying to bring the voices to the community. So follow me. Follow me. On Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Oh, really? Okay. What do you do there? Okay. Really? Are you on LinkedIn? Do you have LinkedIn? I'll give you mine. If you want to.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
See, the other one is for paper. Yeah, perfect. It's a good question. So I have a bunch of episodes of people that are trying to check EHR, privacy is a big topic. It's still a hard problem. It's still a hard problem.
No, that's what the mom told me also. Yeah. I know you said something like, why are you loud? Yeah, like, that's terrifying. You feel like they have it working on
They know what they're doing. They won't lose their privacy.
We do prediction markets.
Oh, yeah. For me, I think it's important to lose their privacy.
What?
That, you have a patient who's 75 years old.
Water
Manage their privacy. There's a lot of issues, but then you can do multi-part.
it doesn't but like slots are not.
Yeah, it could be your phone. You lose your phone, you lose your code or your actual password or something. Yeah, but you're right. The way privacy is manifested is different. It could be your comfort, wireless, biological. So that's a better way. I think there's 5 great ways. But yeah, you're right. It's gonna take time. I don't think it will be 1 to 3 years, in my opinion. Yeah, it's more like 3 to 5.
Yeah.
That ended up in the moment when so I came over.
Never watched it.
You guys watched it.
Are you like our Telegram people?
Yeah.
And I was just sitting here, I didn't even know it was gonna be a fucking thing.
I was just, yeah,
I'm just sitting here like
That's how they can find out.
we should get like how
I wouldn't expect any if you record the portion, I would send you the slide, I can give you some sentences.